Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we have a replay for you of one of our most popular quilt patterns of all time, and that's Frequency. This one is in my book, Fat Quarter Workshop, and you guys have always not been able to get enough of it. We have new kits available in the traditional black and white and gray colorway that we started with when I originally released it. And for the first time ever, we've done a rainbow version as well using Vibrant Life from Clothworks. So this pattern is really awesome. It uses half yards or two matching sets of fat quarters, but we're going to send you half yards. And you're going to put it together Bargello style and then create this really cool wave pattern that to me looks like frequency lines going up and down when you look at audio recordings, hence the name. So I love this one. This is one of the patterns that came to me in the middle of the night when I had insomnia a few years ago, and those you guys always seem to love more than others, so me not sleeping is not always a bad thing. But we're going to take a peek at the new kits that we have for you guys that you can get. Make sure you grab a copy of Fat Quarter Workshop separately, and I will have a signed copy of that for you when it goes out with you. So they may be a little back ordered because I accidentally ordered too many copies of the other book instead of Fat Quarter Workshop. So just make sure that you grab it, and we will ship everything as soon as those books arrive. They come in pretty quick, so we might even have them by the time that this video goes out. All right, let's take a look at the new kits. So this is the rainbow one. We have never done a rainbow version of Frequency. I love how it turned out. It looks absolutely gorgeous, and we've already put it in color order for you. So you just kind of have to pick which one you want to be one and go from there. And it will create a really cool design. And we also send you a printed copy of what it looks like when it comes out. So that way, if it's a little bit before when you get to the kit, you know what it is, what it's going to look like when it's done, and where to find the pattern. Let's take a little bit closer look at the fabric that's in this. This is a digitally printed fabric from Clothworks. It's called Vibrant Life. We used it as Stashin with Stephanie a couple of months ago, and we still had a good amount left of it. So we thought that you guys would like to see it imagined in another way. And this one, it's just stunning. This is one of my favorite prints. Next up, we have this really pretty red orange. It's kind of pixelated and like woven, and it just is really gorgeous. We're getting into more of the orange and yellow colorway, and I love this kaleidoscope design. It is just so stunning. We saw this before in the red, but this one is solidly orange, but it's a couple of different colors of orange, so it looks really good together. Now we have this lovely golden yellow. It is stunningly gorgeous. This is one of my favorite prints in the collection. It is a flower print, and it has all the colors in it, so it makes a really good bridge between the hot colors and the cool colors that we're transitioning into. Here's that kaleidoscope pattern again. This time is very green with some lime and a little bit of orange and yellow in there as well. Here's that pixelated weave again, this time in a green. Now we're transitioning into the blues. This time we've got that kaleidoscope print in a varying hues of blue and green. It's so pretty. Here's that pixelated print again, this time in blue. This one has some blue, some purple, some pink, some magenta. It's just absolutely gorgeous. I love it all. Now we've got that pixelated print again in a sign of a pinky purple. It's really pretty. This is also one of my favorite prints. It's got a sunflower with a black background, and it has all the colors in it. It's just absolutely gorgeous and stunning. This is what you're going to use for your binding. All right, so that's what you're gonna get if you get the Frequency Vibrant Life version. It's this beautiful rainbow, so you can really have a bright and bold Bargello in your house, and it really sews up very fast. So it's really a fun one. Make sure you grab that pattern separately. Let's take a look at the more traditionally colored one with those black, gray, and white. I feel like I should show you guys how these guys come packaged up. So this is what you get. You get everything in a bag, and it's got a picture of what it looks like. Everything is in color order for you. It's in a nice resealable bag, so you can use it as a project bag as you're working on it, or just keep the dust off it until you get a chance to do it. We package all our kits like this because we want it to arrive beautifully to you and look great on your shelf until you're ready to do something with it, and for you to really easily know what it is. So like for this one, it says the pattern is in Fat Quarter Workshop, so you know you got to go find that book and get it from there whenever you get around to making it. This collection features a new assortment of fabrics from Stonehenge from Northcott. This has been a really popular line from them. It looks very natural and stonework. If you do landscape quilts, you'll like this line. But it looks also really fabulous as a Bargello as well. So we're going to take a closer look at what's in here. We'll start with the light fabrics. This is nice light gray marble texture. This one has more veins running through it. It's a little bit darker, so that's why I've got everything in color order for you already in the way that I made the digital version for you guys to take a peek at. This one is more in the grayish territory. We definitely have lines of taupe going throughout the stone look. We're in more slate territory now. It still looks absolutely fantastic. We're continuing to get a little bit darker with each one. This is one of my favorites so far. I love the gray look at it, and with these darker lines running through the stone, it just looks so cool. We've got a couple coming up here that have more of that taupe brown color in it, mixed in with the gray, and that's what I think makes it more timeless, because they're constantly going back and forth between the gray and the browns, and this one has a good job of putting it all together with that nice grayish, so it's going to look good no matter what the trends do. Here is another one. It's a little bit deeper and not as thick of lines going through, but still equally gorgeous, and the color palette is very similar. Next, we have a series of blue grays, again with a little bit of taupe mixed in. I really love this section. It is just stunningly gorgeous. Got a little bit darker yet, and the beauty of this is because those pieces finish 1x3 is depending on where it's cut, you're going to get different looks. It's going to look just so cool all together and just be a really, really fun quilt. I think this is hands down my favorite print of the collection. I love that really deep blue gray with the hints of brown going through it. It's just absolutely stunningly gorgeous. Now we're into the ones that are more like gray black, and again we still have those hints of taupe, so it's going to work throughout the entire collection. It's a very common theme. Then we have a very deep onyx black to finish that off as our darkest print, and it is absolutely stunning. And we're going to finish it off with a plain black solid for the binding, which is going to look absolutely fabulous going around this. So that's what you get if you get the Stonehenge version of Frequency. Whenever we come out with a black and white colorway of this, it usually sells out almost immediately. So I would not wait on this one because it's going to go quick. And who knows on the rainbow one, my husband has been trying to get me to do it for years. He thinks you guys are going to love it. So, you know, it's always a good marital strife when we get to go back and forth on what's going to sell better. So give him a win. Let him go for those bright ones too. All right, let's get into the tutorial so you guys can learn how to make Frequency. So first things first, what I've done is I've kind of lined these fabrics up in order of lightest to darkest. That way it's going to travel from the lightest fabrics to the darkest when I am doing my strip piecing. So whether you're using the fabrics that we are using here, or you are mixing and matching from your own stash, or doing a completely different colorway, that's what you want to do. You want to order it from lightest to darkest, so that way when we start doing the Bargello style, that color change is going to sort of weave in and out to create those sound waves as we place that. So here's the other really good trick you're going to want to use. What I'm doing, because we have to eventually get this into a tube, is when I line up my pieces here, I'm going to line it up so that way my selvages are nice and even with each other, like this. That way, I'm going to have something to line up against, and I'm going to have a nice straight tube to cut down when we get to the Bargello part. So make sure as you are strip piecing all these together that you are always lining up those selvage edges. All right, so now I'm just going to sew my 1/4 inch stitch all the way down here. Now you could sew these just keeping on adding to the strip each time. What I found was easier was to sew everything into sets of 2. So what I'm going to do next is flip these guys right sides together, because these are pieces 3 and 4 in my light to dark color spectrum here, and I can just start sewing those guys together next. All right, so now I have everything sewn into sets of 2, and before we sew some more, I'm going to go ahead and press these. I like to press my seams open for this. It makes for really flat sewing, and it helps keep your strips from getting that little bend in them that sometimes happens when you're sewing long strips together. Let me show you how. Working from the wrong side of the fabric, I'm going to open up that seam with my fingertips. Then I'm going to put the nose of my iron right down the center of that seam, and with my 4 fingers down just ahead of the iron, I'm just going to go ahead and go straight down that seam. What you want to make sure you're looking for is that when you are all done, you have a nice straight line here. This seam, as I'm looking at it here, is perfectly straight. If you have done it wrong, if there like is a pleat on the other side, then it'll look a little wiggly in here, and you'll actually be able to feel that extra fabric when you see it. So what you're looking for is this nice straight line as you're going through. Go ahead and finish that out. And I don't like lift and press and lift and press. I just go straight down, keeping the center of my iron right down there when I'm doing these long strips. Now, I'd like to also hit it from the other side here. And this is another area where you can double check to make sure you've done this right. If you see any pleats or puckers or anywhere where it's not perfectly straight, it means you probably have pressed a pleat into it, and you need to fix that, or your fabric is not going to turn out the right size. You can also see here I've got this edge with the selvage completely straight with each other, and that is so when we make the tube we have something to line it up with, so we have a nice straight tube as we go, as opposed to something with a little bend in it. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We are going to go ahead and sew all these together into sets of 4, and then eventually sew them into a giant tube. And I already have a tube ready to go, so we're going to take a look at that right now. All right, so this is what the tube looks like when it is all sewn together. You can see it is all sewn completely from one side to the other. And you can see here that what I did when I joined it, so here's my darkest piece sewn to my lightest piece. And I've made sure that this part up here was exactly even with those selvages when they got lined up. That way when we go to the next step and we're going to cut them apart, it goes much easier because you have a nice straight tube to work with. If you get this off, then it's going to have like a little bit of a bend in it, and it's not going to work quite right. All right, so I've got my tube laid out, and you can't see the bottom of it, but what you're going to do is you're going to lay your ruler on it, and you want to make sure that the measurement you're cutting to is beyond this. So like, say if you were doing this and it was 3 inches wide, well, you would want to make sure that 3 inches starts after this bit. Otherwise, you're going to end up with selvage in your piecing, and that's not good. That's not what you want. So I'm going to go ahead and get that lined up. I'm not going to give you the measurements exactly here because we want you to get the pattern. If you see something that you love from us and you want to support us, get the materials and the pattern from us, and that will help keep the free video tutorials coming to you. So we thank you for that. So what I'm going to do is just line everything up, and I'm making sure that a nice inch line of the ruler is even with the top. And then I'm kind of checking as I go down that I'm also even here. Your quarter-inch seam might not be absolutely perfect, but as long as you're hitting parallel to your seam line, it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine as long as you can sew consistently throughout your piece. So as long as I'm making sure that the measurement that I need to cut this to is past where that selvage is, I'm going to be good to go here. So now I'm just going to cut. All right, now for this first part, I need to flip everything around and I need to square this up. And I'm going to make sure that I kind of scooch everything over to make sure that my edges are nice and lined up still so that everything is the size it's supposed to be. All right, so this we can get rid of. We don't need that, but we do want to keep these. And what I do is I just stack them to the side as I'm cutting. So going forward, for all of these, you can just keep on cutting all the way down until you've cut as many as you can from your strip tube. And then we're going to move on to the next step where we start sewing the top together. So you've essentially already created almost all of the rows for this. We're going to put them together next, but all this piecing, all this here that you've already done, it's already all together, and we are almost ready to get this top together. So it does go a lot faster than it looks, even though we're doing with little pieces for this month's pattern. So right now you really need to refer to your assembly diagram in your pattern, because you should have numbered your fabrics from 1 through 12, and that way you know exactly where you're supposed to be cutting. I'm going to sew together rows 1 and 2 in this video, and once you know how to do that, you're going to be able to do everything you need to do for this pattern. So this is a Modern Bargello style quilt, and what that means is the pieces are going to kind of move out in a staggered but planned order as they go out. And It also means that we don't need to use any seam rippers or rotary cutters for the rest of the cutting. We're just going to use a trusty pair of embroidery scissors. I really like my microtip ones. They have a spring-loaded action, so they just pop open. So if you have hand problems, they're great for that. And they're also really sharp. We've got these on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. All right, so first step for row 1, what I need to do is, you can see the white line where that seam is, and I'm just going to cut right on top of where that seam was to take off that seam allowance. And I know this is kind of scary because we're cutting into a seam allowance, but it works out perfectly. All right, so now I can open that up, and I've got 1/2 of my row. I'm going to repeat that with the other side. And now I have the other half of my row for row 1. So we already have everything pieced together. We just have to sew this little center seam together, and row 1 is complete. So it's super fast, super quick. All right, so now we're gonna get row 2 ready to go. What I like to do, and what I found works best for my brain, where I'm least likely to screw up, is to do 2 rows at a time. So I'll do 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4, because you are just going to go out halfway. And that'll make sense in just a second here. All right, so this seam is part of the one, it was the last one that was sewn together when the tube was joined. So what I need to do is I need to press the seam open so I have a guide to do. So I'm gonna do that real quick here. So just like before, I just open that up and press that seam open. So in order to create the Bargello style, we need to have this lightest fabric here start in the middle. So what I'm going, and then everything else kind of, you know, staggers down. So what I'm going to do here is, now that we have these seams pressed open, is I'm going to fold them in half, and I'm going to meet up those folds on either side, just like that. So you can see here, I've got the folds right on top of each other where those seam allowances are. So they're right on top. So once I'm satisfied with that placement, I double check both sides so that I have a nice straight edge on top. I'm just going to pinch that, and then I'm just going to finger crease that to give myself a center. And then I'm going to stick my embroidery scissors in, give it a little trim, and now I have my stagger point. And these rows should be the exact same width when you do this. By cutting off those ends, and then also by cutting it in half, you remove the same amount of seam allowance. So your rows should be the same length when you put these together, and they're really cool, and it will just continue to create this graduated step motion. And it's really great. You just kind of have to pay attention to where you are at when you are trimming and getting everything ready to go. That's why I like to do 2 rows at a time, and then I can look and see, okay, I did this next time, so that means next I need to move into the fabric that is after that, which would be having the whole one of this be next. So just refer to your pattern assembly diagram, make sure you are numbering your fabrics, make sure all your fabrics are sewn together in the same order when you are putting your tubes together. But if you do that and you just take it slow, you will be able to do this with no problem. And you can mess up a couple of them, because I certainly have as I've been doing this. When I make the pattern for the first time, I'm writing it as I go. So I don't have something to follow. I'm making those notes and making those mistakes so I know where to tell you guys where to watch out for. And this is one of them. So I recommend just doing 2 rows at a time, and you'll be good to go. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and give this guy a trim, and then we're gonna sew these guys together and join our rows. All right, so I got that fold again. Give it a little trim. And then line it up. So you can see how this is starting to look cool already, because that is just going to be that graduated step out. All right, so now I'm going to fold these right sides together so I can sew these center 2 seams together, still using that 1/4 inch seam. All right, so I really just have to line these up like I would any other fabric I was sewing together. And it's not a huge amount, so it is, you don't have to pin this. You can totally get away with skipping that if you want. But by all means, pin it if you feel like that will help you. Then to save a little bit of time, I'm going to chain piece the next row in. So now I'm going to give these a little press, and it's important to remember that you're going to have more than just a seam that you just sewed to go together, because you also, in some cases, are going to have that area where it was pressed open, where that last join was. We already did it for this one, but that's not the case for all of them. And a lot of times this seam here was where the edge of the tube was, so it kind of got flattened out a little bit when I was doing my cutting. So I want to just hit that again as well. Just give it a good look to make sure everything is nice and flat before you proceed. All right, so this part's really cool. You're going to have no seams to match at all, ever, for the entire rest of the assembly of this quilt, except for the center seam. So it's no big deal. It's pretty easy, and even that, you've got two of the same fabrics together, so if you're a little off, nobody is ever going to know. So what I do is I lay them right sides together, and I just look from the top to make sure, since those seams are pressed open, that those seams are right on top of each other. You can always peel this back a little bit to see how you're doing. And then I put a little pin in the right side of that seam allowance, because when we are sewing, we're going to be sewing through from here, and then I can stop with my needle down on the left side of the seam allowance, pull the pin, and then everything will stay in place. Now, since there's a lot of seams here, but none of them match, that means that I really don't pin that much for the rest of this. So I'm going to go all the way down to the end of the strip, and then I'm going to match those corners, put a pin in, and from here I take it 1/2 at a time. So what I do is I'm going to grab the halves where the pins are, and then I'm going to just lay them down and kind of hit about the middle. And I like to put the pin in where there is a seam on the back. And that just kind of gives me a good stopping point. I'm not judging that this is like exactly in the middle. It's just halfway, like 1/4 of the way in between. Then I'm going to split that again. So we've got our pins at the middle and then at the 1/4. And I'm going to do the same thing here, where I just kind of pull them taut, lay them down, make sure my edges are nice and lined up, put a pin in, and again, that's through the seam allowance on another one. Do that one more time on this half. All right, so I've got a pin at the end, 1/4 way through, and halfway in between that, in the middle, and again halfway in between the quarters. I'm going to repeat that on the other side, getting these ready to go in the sewing machine. And when I'm doing this part, once I have all my ones together, the way I kind of split it up is I did half of one of the frequencies at a time. So when I did it, I kind of just based it on how many I could fit on my table. If I could have fit more, then I would have done more. But I could fit about half on when I was just laying out the rows. And then once I was pretty good, I could see all the steps, I knew everything was going in the right order, then I took a break and I started sewing them all into sets of 2 and 4 and so on until I had an entire half together, and then I would move on and do the bottom half where it comes back together. I find that that really helps if you can think about how you're going to break up the construction of a quilt, because if you're just looking at all of these really thin rows, it can seem a little overwhelming. But if you think of it in sections like that, like first I'm just going to get all my rows together for half of one of these, and then I'm going to get those together, and then I'm going to move on and I'm going to do another half. And then you can easily break that up into a couple hour segments and really feel like you've made some progress. So that's how I kind of tackle it in my head. You do what works for you. So I do leave this first pin in long enough just to get those first couple of stitches in, so I know that that is good and secure. And then what I do is I kind of just pull it taut until that first pin. So I'm always kind of working from pin to pin here. And I just kind of put my hand down to kind of keep it nice and taut. You don't want to stretch it out, that would be bad, but you do want to keep it kind of snug. And the other thing is, because there's a lot of these seam allowances here, I kind of lift up every time I go over this lip to make sure that those are laying nice and flat. And yes, if I do have one flip, I will unpick that and flip it nice and flat, because that will ensure that my quilt lays super flat and I can do whatever I want when it comes to quilting. So again, every time I get there, just kind of lift this up, and that kind of helps that seam that's pressed flat just lay the way it's supposed to. Alright, so I've got to the first pin, so again I'm just going to grab until I've got that other pin, and I'm just going to repeat as I go down this strip, sewing my 1/4 inch seams. press this seam open as well, but I'm going to do it a little bit differently just because we have all these seam allowances that I don't want to get pressed going in the wrong direction. So what I'm going to do here is start just like before, where I open up that seam allowance. But instead of just sliding the iron straight down, I am still opening that up with my fingertips, but I'm going to lift and press for this one. So just lift and press your way all the way down, and that will help keep these seam allowances from getting pushed in the wrong direction as you are working. Once you work your way all the way down, you're going to flip everything over, and you're also going to press from the other direction. This one I do just slide straight down. If anything feels like it has curved at all, what you can do is you can just kind of straighten that out however you need to as you press. And if you feel like anything needs to get a little bit flatter, you can always use a little bit of spray, just water, or a spray starch alternative. And I tend not to use steam in my iron. I feel like that distorts the fabric, and I'm worried it's going to damage the iron. So I prefer to just use an external source like that water bottle or a spray starch alternative if I feel like I want to get it even flatter than what the iron has done on its own, which is plain heat. Alright, so we're going to keep doing that. We're going to get all of our rows together, and I'm going to show you what it looks like when it's all joined. Alright, so you're going to join your rows in the sets of 2 and 4 and so on until you have one entire frequency put together. And there are a couple of these throughout the quilt that you're going to put together, and you can see here how it just sort of goes out. So you've got your whole one, and then a half, a whole, and a half, and it just keeps going out and out. And because we've sewn that in a tube, all you have to do is snip in the right spot and use your assembly diagram and your pattern to go with this. The pattern is called Frequency. You can get that at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. I recommend you label your fabrics so that way you know which one is which number, so that you end up with the right area, and you can see it comes back to center there. And then here's the kind of fun thing about this quilt. It worked out really well math-wise for it to be the length to be kind of the length of a, not quite a twin, but close to it. And then the width, once you get all of these together, is perfect for like a lap twin size. We're putting them together as vertical rows. And so when it's all together, this is what it looks like as a vertical row. And you can see it kind of looks like a sound wave going in and out. We'll show some photos of the finished quilt to you all so you can see that as well. So thanks so much for following along. If you liked what's going on in our video tutorial, please like and subscribe here on YouTube and ring the bell so you know when we're getting new videos. You also can sign up for our emails over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. We have hundreds of free video tutorials, and we specialize in modern contemporary quilting fabrics over there. So if this is your jam, come check us out. We'd love to have you over there. Thanks so much for following along, and until next week, happy quilting.